Hello Everypony, I'm FlutterGuy317 and today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on some of the new features of Inkscape 0.49 and also some vector shading. After my Luna vector, which you can see here, I got a couple of requests for a shading tutorial, so I thought I'd put one together, and I also thought I would show basically some of the techniques that I'm using to create my newer vectors like Luna with some of the new features of Inkscape 0.49, which includes power strokes, which is basically Inkscape's answer to Illustrator's stroke width tool, so you can vary the width of your stroke throughout. So like all of my strokes in my Luna vector are using power strokes. And also some path cloning, and I guess I can also demonstrate nested clipping, which is pretty awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started and dig right in. Here I have basically the shell of this Applejack vector. You can see I've already done all the stroking. I've created her eyes. I just want to focus on the power stroking and path cloning and shading and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with applying power strokes to all of my strokes that taper. And to do that, I go path effects, and it pops up over here. And I'm going to add power stroke. And internally, this converts it to a path, but you can still manipulate it like a stroke. So that's why it's stroking the internal path. So what I'm going to do basically is I'm going to swap the fill and stroke there. And then I'm going to come over here and you can see all of your different options here. The interpolator type is basically how the stroke width will be interpolated between these control points here, seen in pink. These are basically define the stroke width. So I'm going to set that to cubic Bezier fit because I find that works the best with getting a stroke that looks good. And then the start cap and end cap I'm going to set to 0 width because this is going to taper basically. And the join is for if you have a sharp corner like in the mane or in the muzzle. It's the same kind of thing with your stroke style, your standard stroke style, with the join here and your caps there. So I'm going to go ahead. Unfortunately, the width of the stroke is changed when you apply power stroke. So what I like to do is I'll basically duplicate this, Control D, remove the power stroke, and set up a stroke of a different color. So that's basically my guideline stroke for what I want my width to be. And then I basically will just take the control points and move them around until I get it pretty much where I want it to be. Another nice feature of Inkscape 0.49 is if you lose a stroke, you can hold down Alt and scroll the mouse wheel until you find the stroke that is underneath a different stroke or whatever. So you can see that there's some weird obscurities at the end here. What you can do is you can add extra nodes in by control clicking and then dragging, and then you can kind of use that to manipulate the stroke width all the way to the end. Sometimes you need to adjust some more points, and the reason for these kind of weird shapes is because of this this interpolator type here. It basically will it works throughout the entire stroke, so you sometimes will get these weird things. But yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to add this as well. Power stroke to this. So same kind of thing. I'm not going to duplicate this stroke just because it's not really a full stroke width. So I'm just kind of going to eyeball it. And it is a little finicky, so you do have to play around with it. until you get it to look right. But I mean, once it is all set, you can drag your stroke around, you can make changes to it, you can add points, remove points, and stuff like that, and your the tips won't become untapered and stuff like that. It's really nice. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna introduce path cloning, which is also a new feature, which is this clone original path (LPE), and this was introduced because of PowerStroke, because PowerStroke is converted to a path internally. There's no way to really make a separate fill, so they kind of came up with this, and it's similar to your normal clone, so create clone, except that you can change the color, you can change the layer, and again, if you change the original path, that path will also change. So you can stretch that path, and it's really nice because you'll never have fill errors, basically, whenever you do that. This is kind of bugging me, unfortunately. And yeah, there we go. Cool. So Applejack's ear is done, basically. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do her front leg. And yeah, I don't know if there's a way to change these options, like the default options here. Because I always seem to end up changing them to what they are currently. But again, this is heavily in development, so there's no telling what they're going to be introducing next for it. It'd be actually really nice. I unfortunately don't have too much free time, but it'd be nice to be able to get onto the Inkscape development team and kind of start adding some new features that would help create ponies. So here I'm going to clone this again, and then I'm also going to color this, might as well. When you're dealing with a power stroke, it is considered internally to be a path, so if you're selecting a color, you don't have to hold shift down while you're picking the color. For normal strokes like here, you do need to hold shift down. But here I can also use clone. And again, even though this is just a normal stroke, same thing applies with the clone path. It will follow what your original path looks like. So clone. And clone. And I'm kind of trying to rush through anything that's kind of standard vectoring, like regular strokes, just because I do want to get to the shading. So standard, vector coloring. Again, there's not that much different from normal vectoring techniques. You try and keep everything as smooth as possible when it's your strokes. If you are looking for, if you are looking for a very basic tutorial, I would highly recommend checking out the MLP Vector Club, because they have a lot of really good tutorials. And clone original path. Okay, so Applejack's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to start applying some more power strokes. First one is going to be here. Power stroke. And I think, yep. Sometimes I'm not sure which is the start and which is the end cap, so you just kind of have to guess and hope that it's the right one. And if it's not, then just swap it. Yeah, so to delete one of these nodes, it's Alt, Control, and click, and to add one, it's just Control and click. And you can see it's starting to come together pretty nicely. It does take a little bit of getting used to, the whole power stroking thing, just because you know, you are messing around with these points, and it's not like just typing in your predefined thickness, unfortunately. But it also, you know, it gives you a good degree of freedom when you're vectoring, because then you can always go back and change things around a little bit, kind of fiddle with the stroke a little bit more, which you couldn't do beforehand. Cool. All right, so for her muzzle, I'm actually going to vary the stroke width inside her mouth, because if you look at a pony in a 3/4 pose or a side pose or anything like that, you can see that when their mouth is open, it's about 0.6, maybe 60% of a full stroke. And yeah, so power stroke is really the best way to go about doing this. And yeah, you do get some oddities when you're using that Bezier fit, but it does come out really nice in the end. And I need to change this to miter now. And I'm going to pull that up a little bit. See, so like for instance there, I'm adjusting the stroke and the whole stroke width is staying the same because of the whole power stroke thing. Cool. So that's looking pretty good. I'm also going to do a power stroke on her nostril, which might be overkill, but I found that it also works pretty well. You just have to kind of play around with it until you get it to look right. There we go. And again, I'm going to clone this. Oh. And move that down, and then color both of these. And while I'm at it, I'll color that stroke. Okay. Next, I'm going to apply a power stroke to the mane and also to the tail. Because if you look in the show, there's a bit of a sweeping curve in the front, which is kind of a little bit wider than the curve in the back, which kind of gives it a little bit more definition. So both of these are going to end in butts because they're up against the end there, and it's going to miter, and I'll adjust my miter there. Let me duplicate that. And then start modifying. All right. Starting to look pretty good. Still a little bit of a obscurity thing here. So I'm just going to kind of duplicate that. Go ahead and do that. Awesome. And then same thing with her tail. And I don't really know if there's an easier way to do this power stroke thing besides, just dragging the points to the where you want it. But it seems to work fairly well. And I'm going to clone that. And I'm going to also color and clone her mane. Cool. So now if we take the pick off, you can see there's no fill issues or anything like that. The only issue with the whole cloning thing is if you have like multiple strokes which define your shape, for instance, like Applejack's body, then you do unfortunately have to go through and apply your fill manually or define your fill manually. You can do an entire vector with path cloning and power strokes, and I've started to create essentially a puppet using power strokes and path cloning, which is kind of interesting because then you really don't have to worry about your fills. You can manipulate the pony afterwards, like the pony pose. I'm kind of trying to see if I can recreate what they do in Flash in Inkscape, which I should be able to do, but it's just a kind of fun project. Yep. I'm actually gonna skip vectoring her cutie mark, and her freckles. I'll leave those out as well because I do want to get onto the shading. But yeah, so you can see Applejack starting to look good, kind of come together. And you do get this nice sweep in the mane and this nice sweep in the tail and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the shading. Now the biggest key when you're shading a vector is to make sure you know where your light sources are. I'm going to place my light source basically right above Applejack's mane, kind of shining down on her face. you can also do multiple light sources, but it's a little bit more difficult because then you have to have more shading shapes and stuff like that and kind of cross them. And it's something that I would like to do eventually, but I haven't done one yet. And I know like a lot of other vector artists have released some shading tutorials. Like Yonoda has done a shading tutorial with Inkscape, where he shades the fills and stuff like that using blends and gradient meshes, which looks fantastic. And I do it a little bit differently. My shading will cover both the fills and the strokes. And you can use this method really with Inkscape or Illustrator or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with shading her front right leg. So I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to basically add my shading stroke. And this I'm going to set to pure black, and I'm going to drop the opacity to like 30. Now I extended this beyond the leg because when I apply a blur, which is what I'm going to be using, you can see it goes like it blurs all the edges, so you can't have a hard edge. So the best way to get a hard edge, I'm going to turn this off for now, is to clip it. So basically I'm going to duplicate this stroke and I'm going to convert it to a path. And if it's a power stroke, you have to use the object to path. If it's a normal stroke, it's stroke to path. So I'm going to convert that. And you can see that power stroke internally uses a lot of anchor points. So what you want to basically do is just remove all of the interior anchor points because you're defining your clipping path here. And you want all the shading to be within the leg. And there's really, I don't know if there's a better way of doing this with removing all these nodes, or it'd be really nice if they had like a clip to outer edge option instead of having to go through this every time. But, you know, there's always room for improvement. I think I'm almost done. Let me check. Not quite. One of the bad things about this technique is that once you create your clip, then if you go back and change your original path, then you basically have to create another clip. But once you have your clip set, you don't have to create it multiple times for different shading objects. So there we go. This is clipped to there. I'm going to put on a blur now of 10 and then just kind of adjust. And really that's all shading is you kind of just have to adjust it and eyeball it. And same thing with like the blur and opacity levels. And it really also depends on personal preference. If you want like hard shading or soft shading, you can change those. And you can also change the coloring slightly if you want like a blue tint or a yellow tint or something like that. You can see here I'm kind of clipping on the edge there. So I might want to either lower the blur or, yeah. So next I'm going to shade Applejack's under her chin. And because my muzzle is on a separate stroke, I can just kind of go underneath it, except I need to add here I'm going to add body shading. And then I'm going to move this down into my body shading. There we go. So I don't have to clip it at the top, but I do have to clip it to her body. So again, duplicate the stroke, convert it to a path, and then just delete a bunch of nodes. And it's a tedious process, but the results are pretty fantastic. So because this is such a long process, I probably won't get to the whole vector within this tutorial, but I do want to touch on some like key points of shading. So we'll hopefully get to those. And then I'm going to probably finish up this vector and post it to my DA page. And then I can basically I can maybe do a video of what I changed, what I did a little bit differently in the final vector versus what I did in this tutorial. So set my clip and then apply a blur. This I kind of want to be a hard blur because it's underneath. And that's the thing about shading is like depending on where you are in your vector, the shading could be harder or softer, or and that's also, you know, depending on the lighting situation. If you have multiple lights, you'll get some too like soft shading paths crossing. So there we go. And I'm going to basically do a muzzle shading to give her chin a little bit of definition. So again, clone, convert to path. A lot of anchor points. And just go through and delete them all. So yeah, this is my first tutorial, so I know it's not quite the end yet, but thanks for watching, and you know, leave some feedback. I honestly have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to tutorials, so if you leave some feedback and tell me what I could be doing differently, if you guys would like some background music or something like that, then I can see what I can do about that. And yeah, I think I will probably do some more vector tutorials, like I said before. Awesome. So just set the clip there, but this I actually have to, if you don't really know Inkscape that well, you can see your clip or your mask if you select one of these options. Unfortunately, you can see it's clipping there, so I'm going to kind of alter my clip a little bit and drag it there. So if Hermina wasn't here, you kind of have to play around with this, give it a little bit more of a curve so that you can see her head versus her body. And if this was the case, I'd probably end up layering her head fill on top of the body fills, just so that I can kind of go underneath the fill. But yeah, it didn't really matter in this vector, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a nice blur. Actually, that's a bit much. Let's go with 15. So you can start to see she's getting some definition. I'm going to do basically a blur underneath her mane. And this I'm going to clip to this stroke, which is a normal stroke, not a power stroke, so it's a lot easier to deal with. And gotta move that all the way up. And then set clip. And I'm going to actually bring that out and then give that a nice hard blur. The reason that I give this a hard blur as opposed to soft blur is because if you give it like a soft blur, then it kind of all gets lost, and here it will get clipped by the ear, which you can do some things about that, but I'd rather just leave it hard so that you get a nice definition here. And you can kind of see, if I can grab my stroke here. There we go. Kind of see she's starting to get some definition. So her mane's no longer flat on her head, it's kind of lifted up. I'm also going to shade her eye. So for this, it's the same kind of thing. You have to create your your shading shapes, basically. And then I can clip it with the eyeball itself. Set clip. And then I'm going to give maybe a 10. And then will also be a 10. For eyes, if you do shading on your eyes, you might want to make it kind of minimal, just kind of to give it some definition so it looks a little 3D. Yep. And then I'm also going to add some shading for her eye socket, basically. So that her eye will really pop out. Well, not pop out of the socket, but it'll pop out in the picture, kind of. So for this, I'm going to use a really hard blur, so like 5, and I'll also turn the opacity down, so like maybe 15. So there you can see her eye is starting to look 3D. And actually the rest of her is starting to look 3D as well. Cool. I guess I will do just her mane then, and then I think I'll probably end the tutorial because it might be going pretty long. So, mane shading. One of the nice things with Inkscape 0.49 is you can click and drag layers now. So if you mislayer something or like mismanage your layers, you can always drag them around. You can also make a layer, a sublayer of another layer by dragging it on top of it, which is really nice. So layering system is still not really as good as Illustrator or Photoshop, but it's getting there. And here I'm going to create my clip again. And I'm going to set clip and then apply a blur, like 10. And I'm also going to up the opacity. And again, with that, you just kind of have to play around with it until it looks right. I can also add some lighting effects to Applejack's main. So I'll add that basically on the front end. And that's going to be kind of the same concept, but instead of black, it's going to be white. And then, again, the nice thing is I can release this clip. Yep. Release. And then move that up and clip both objects. And if you're doing like a wet mane pony, you can leave this kind of unblurred, but since I'm not, I can apply a blurring to it, and it just gives it some definition. You can also up the opacity. So yeah, Applejack's starting to look pretty well shaded. I'm also going to just quickly add an ear shadow just to show you some overlapping shading. And yeah, if you do add blurs, it does take up a lot of processing power. So my poor laptop can't really handle it all. So for this, I'm going to basically stay on the same layer. Again, I'm going to release this clip. And then the clip to the top. And clip both those objects. And then here, we'll say 10. And there you go. So with the light source being directly like above her head, maybe a little bit more towards the viewer, you can kind of fiddle around with your shadows to define where the light source is coming from. But yeah, the most important thing about shading is that you do follow your light source. Because I've seen some vectors where there was some odd shading and it threw the entire vector off. But yeah, this is basically the technique that I use for shading my vectors, which covers both the strokes and the paths, or the strokes and the fills. Again, this tutorial is probably going pretty long, so I probably won't do any more shading, but you kind of get the gist of it. I hope this was informative, and I don't know, I hope it kind of inspires some of you ponies to get out and try your hoof at shading a vector or using Inkscape 0.49. I'll provide links to that in the description. I'll also provide a link to the reference picture that I use, the color guide that I use, some tutorials for like if you're just starting out vectoring and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, you can see even with like a show trace, you can really pop the character off of the screen with a little bit of shading. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please leave your feedback. I would love to hear feedback, and I'm constantly looking for ways to improve. So I hope that again, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. So I hope you guys had a good time and that this was very informative and that you enjoyed it. And I will be releasing more tutorials in the future, hopefully. See you.